It's the first time I'm starting off with a script written before I ever built the PC, and that's because almost exactly a year ago to the day I did a very similar build with 3600 non-X and a 2066GB. I was even tempted to reuse some of the voice recordings, but after a year of updates most games will show enough of a difference that I didn't feel comfortable doing that. Back then a 2060 was in the 150 quid range for a decently priced one, and while I was expecting it to lose more value in going to the 140 to 150 quid range today, it's still actually closer to 200 on eBay. Whether or not that's good value, I guess it's up to the individual buyers to judge. Enough of all of that though, let's get into this build. The CPU in there is the aforementioned 3600X installed on an Asus Prime A320MK motherboard. Not the sexiest thing in the world when it comes to motherboard, but hey, it's decent enough if you're not looking to overclock. The reason you are seeing me fumbling so much with the thermal paste is because it has become a bit too thick due to the oil separation issues of the MX5. RTX did get back to me and essentially asked me to send them a picture with all the paste squeezed out onto a towel, which I found stupid considering still just as good, although a little bit difficult to apply now. The cooler going on top is the always excellent AMD Wraith Prism RGB, which is in my opinion an ideal choice for Ryzen 5 CPUs. Pity that not a single Ryzen 5 CPU ships with it. Instead they come with its much lesser cousin, the heat pipeless Wraith Stealth. Because this RAM kit happens to be identical to my last build, here is what I said a year ago, and after a few more attempts at 4000 plus Mbps RAM, boy do I stand by that statement. The RAM, I'm going fast and fancy with this 3600 DDR4 CL18 kit from Corsair that is adorned with RGB. It's about as fast as you should go for Zen 2 processors, as purchasing faster kits will likely lead to either incompatibilities or the halving of the Infinity Fabric speed. If possible, always make sure that the RAM kit you are getting is on the motherboard's qualified vendors list and was tested against your specific CPU. But more broadly, it's a good idea to cap it 3600 Mbps anyways. When manually tuning, you are better off tightening the timings than upping the transfer rate if using a 3000 series Ryzen. The case is, well, I have no idea what make or brand it is, but it's got RGB, so there's that. In the front I've added the speed switch controlled Antec fan, and in the exhaust the Corsair PWM one. This is because the Prime A320 only supports pulse width modulation and not DC regulation, which is a bit of a pain. Apart from that, I pre-installed a decent EVGA bronze rated PSU and a 500GB freebie hard drive. Oh yeah, and before I forget, the M.2 drive you see installed in here was bought and I had to return it for warranty, so I replaced it with a brand new SATA SSD. When I picked up this 2060, I originally thought from the pictures that it should be a Strix model, but it's not. It's an Asus dual one, with the only difference being the number of fans. My advice when buying a new graphics card is don't waste your money on high-end models, just buy the next one up in the stack. For instance, instead of a top-of-the-line 3060 Ti, go for a 3070, as there will be so little between them it will make no sense to go for the lesser model. Thankfully that does not translate to the second-hand market. Back to the card on hand, it did really impress me with one standout detail. It has memory thermal pads. Every single 2060 that I had until now did not come equipped with them, and I had to manually mod them in. That plus the fact that the cooler is a proper fin array instead of a sky blocked of aluminium. And now let's have a look at some pictures and I shall see you in the benchmarking section. We start off really strong in heaven, and for reference a bulk standard 2060 usually posts around 171 FPS on average, but I suspect that because of its factory overclock and great cooling, this 2060 managed to beat expectations by matching a 1080 in performance at 179 FPS. This is just 18 FPS shy of its much newer 3060 cousin and embarrassingly a whopping 50 FPS ahead of a more expensive RTX 3050. Superposition is a much newer benchmark that is similar to Heaven, i.e. it is built on the same engine by the same people, but its demands are much higher. Here the 2060 manages an impressive 80 FPS. It seems Rocket League decided to behave on this run, posting a very stable and playable 300-ish FPS. For an esports title with everything turned all the way up at 1080p, I can't hear anyone complaining. Fortnite at epic settings with DLSS ran with a very respectable 138 FPS on average, which puts it firmly into a great gaming territory. Ran this without the new Lumen and Nanite enhancements because in order to turn those on, the frame rate gets capped at 60 and there's still quite a lot of kinks to be worked out, making for a rather unreliable benchmark. Control at its highest settings with DLSS makes for a very compelling experience at 67 FPS on average. Personally, I would just cap this to 60 with VSync for additional stability, with the bottom line being that it looks absolutely gorgeous even after all these years, and because of the continuous RT improvements you can actually play and enjoy it on a mid-range GPU with all the eye candy. Horizon Zero Dawn posts a very satisfying 100 FPS in the benchmark with ultimate quality plus DLSS. If you haven't played this game yet, I wholeheartedly recommend it, and after you are done with it, please send an email to Sony and ask them to release Forbidden West on PC already. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I set all the settings to their respective maximum and turned FSR on, netting me 60 FPS. This being an exploration game really doesn't need that much more, with my preference always being towards better visuals in this type of games. It goes without saying that if you don't have a VRR display, you should turn on VSync. In Days Gone, I've gone for stupid, meaning very high settings in the opening motorcycle chase scene, where we got a really playable 80 FPS on average. If you find you need an edge against a horde, then you can do the sensible thing and drop down to high, which will dramatically boost FPS and look virtually the same. Whether or not that will make any tangible difference in your gameplay is for you to decide. Far Cry 6 at Ultra Sans RT felt very fluid at 85 FPS on average. I've ranted many a times about the shortcomings of its engine when it comes to resource management and whatnot, but I must admit it does a terrific job running this well, can only be described as sensible or slightly above average hardware. It's when a 16-core overclock processor becomes a serious bottleneck to a 40 series card that I get choked up. I pushed Cyberpunk as much as I could on this graphics card, and after so many patches and performance updates, it's not a bad experience at all, posting almost 50 FPS at very high settings with DLSS balanced. This is such an atmospheric game that playing it while neutering its beautiful looks kinda misses the point by trying to hit very high FPS, which in this case won't do much for the gameplay. If you really must get to at least 100 FPS, I would recommend reading a few optimization guides, as there are third-party software that can do wonders in this game, boosting the FPS without degrading the visuals noticeably. But obviously, those are unfortunately not suitable for a benchmarking section. And finally, the famous Witcher post-next gen update. First of all, right off the bat, playing with RT is a no-go on any GPU below 3080 Ti. My 4090 can't deliver above 50 FPS without resorting to DLSS frame generation. The implementation is clearly broken. Moving on, and simply playing in DirectX 12 mode has a massive detrimental effect. Going to the center of a city more aptly shows what I am on about, with the frame rate dropping without a lot of explanation. But when I tried going back to DirectX 11 with the exact same quality setting, suddenly it alleviated this CPU bottleneck issue, I guess? I don't know if it's a bug or if it is only the additional overhead translating DirectX 11 to DirectX 12 calls is to blame, but unless you are viewing this in the future when CD Projekt Red has fixed the RT implementation to a point where it is actually usable, this is definitely the way to play this game, as there is no difference in the visual quality at all by dropping down to DirectX 11. And that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.